Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm here for part 6, at least I think it's part 6, of our kitchen tips and tricks. And today I'm going to be talking about some unconventional uses for your everyday kitchen items that you might not have thought about it. Now, some of these things are probably going to be pretty obvious, and most of you probably already do, but you never know. There's always new people coming in that just don't think of some of the various ways some of these things can be used. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to start off with is canning jars. The list of things that you can use canning jars for is very long. In fact, I'm not even sure if there's an end to it. I use canning jars for all kinds of things, and so I'm only going to talk about just a few of them here. But if you watch any of my old videos, you can see all the many ways I preserve foods besides just regular canning by freezing and vacuum sealing. But there's other things that I like to preserve in my canning jars, plus many other things that I use them for. And if you look back here on the shelf that Patrick built for me a couple of years ago, this is my tea shelf. Now, I make tea out of all kinds of homegrown herbs and store-bought spices, or only organic when I can get them. And the ones that I use most regularly for my teas are out here on this shelf. And so that, you know, having them in the canning jars with the rustic lids just makes it look nice. And plus, I'm not having to store them in plastic, which is the reason why I do more and more all the time. My preserving in any method of food items in jars is to get away from plastic. Aside from food items, you can store non-food items that you want to keep dry and oxygen free, such as some desiccant packs like I have here. This would also apply to oxygen absorbers and the Wizzy wipes like I talked about in a recent video. Now, any videos that I'll be mentioning in this particular video, I'm just going to say this right here so I don't have to say it again, I will be linking in the description box down below. Don't forget to click on show more, then you can go to that link. Other things that you can use your jars for are, like I have back here, some homemade citrus vinegar. This is totally homemade. This isn't going and buying white vinegar and adding citrus peels to it. This is making it from scratch. But these ones are about done. I'm going to be filtering them out here soon. So I always make all my vinegars in half-gallon mason jars. And then other things I do is making extracts. I use the jars of various sizes depending on how much extract I want to make whatever flavored extract or medicinal extract I want. Right here are the flavored extracts I did. All the ones in the half-pint jars are the alcohol-free ones, and then this one is a half and half blend. Now, I have a video that I just put out on these that you can check out if you would like to learn how to make your own alcohol-free ones, but I also have a video on other extracts as well for flavoring. So other options are infusing my oils, like this one here I have of all my homegrown herbs. Not all my homegrown herbs, but the specific ones I like to use in my skin cream. And so that's what's going on there. And that one's ready because I started it on the 1st of December, so I can filter that out at any time. I usually just wait until I have to, until I really need to do it. And then right here is another example of my infused red pepper oil. This is a hot pepper oil. I have a video on that too. I use that for a couple of different main things. So you can check out that video to learn about that. Here, obviously, I do use it for storing items. Like when I make a batch of granola, then I just put it in my jars, my mason jars like this, and then put what it is so I know which granola it is, because I have 2 different granolas down there. I have the peanut butter and the banana coconut. And of course, I like to store my herbs and spices that I use every day or regularly in the smaller half-pint jars like this. I just get the nicer lids that, you know, they just look nicer. And so this works really good. I don't have to store them in plastic. And if you're getting craft lids like I have here, just simply get liners for the inside. You can get special silicone liners, but if you're trying to avoid silicone too, then you can just simply take beeswax, melt it right in the lid, and then brush it around in there to make your lids food safe. And then another thing I like to do with my jars is when I'm making Patrick some of the creamsicles, I do have the popsicle molds, but sometimes I'm making extra, or maybe you don't have popsicle molds and you want to make some frozen treats, then blend them up like I've shown in many videos of making frozen treats, and then just pour them in a glass like this and then freeze it. And then once it's fully frozen, go ahead and put a lid on it. If you're not going to eat it immediately, then go ahead and put a lid on it, like these new ball ones that they have out. These are great ones, and that will also keep it fresher, because if you make these up, you want to eat them right away if you're not going to put a lid on it. But anyway, putting the lid on it will make it last longer in the freezer without it getting that stale flavor. So that's what I'm going to be doing today, and that's why I showed these. I'm going to be making some creamsicles. If I have any extra, I just pour it in a glass like this, and that's the first one that Patrick will eat. And then another thing I like to use mason jars for is for mixing dry ingredients. So right here I have ready to go. I have some, I'm making some cinnamon sugar, and so what I have, you won't be able to see the difference between the two browns, but I have organic cane sugar, I have organic coconut sugar, and I have an organic Ceylon cinnamon. So I'm going to make up some more cinnamon sugar that Patrick likes to put on his oatmeal and some other things. If I'm just going to make a pint or less at a time, I put the dry ingredients in a quart jar like this, and then all I have to do is shake it up. Just like that. The same thing applies if you're going to make if you want to make a quart size amount, then simply get your half-gallon jars, put your dry ingredients in there. You're going to put up to 4 cups of whatever ingredient. Like this one, I only made just a little better than a half pint, because you can put up to 2 cups of ingredients in your quart jar to get a good blend. You don't want to go over the halfway point when you're wanting to use the shake method, because then it gets harder for it to blend well. But you just shake it really well until you see everything evenly coated and blended in. And then you can store it in a smaller jar once that's done. So that's another thing that's an unconventional use that I like to use my canning jars for. And again, the list goes on. I'm not going to cover all those here, but what I'll do is, of course, leaving the comments open for people to share all their many other ways that they like to use canning jars that they like to use their canning jars for anything besides canning with, whatever it is that you do. And I'm sure you've got a long list just like I do. All right, then another more unconventional use for something like this stoneware pan. This was sent to me by one of my subscribers. She knows that I really like the stoneware, and it was really a blessing because I have 2. Look how dark mine is. It's been used so much. I have 2 of these, and I'm using them so often that I wished I had a 3rd one. So this was perfect. She didn't even know that. So I got another pan here, and one of the things besides baking, I actually use these pans for drying things more than I do for actually baking things in them. Yes, I do bake cookies and stuff in them, but they're more apt to be used for dehydrating out small things, like when I've pre-soaked my grains and then I want to dry them out and then jar them up so that they're ready to go when I go to grind them. This is one way I do it. A lot of times I'll set it on top of my drying rack on the highest point so that it's not too close to the wood stove. Another thing I like to do is put the grains on there and then put it next to the drying rack, next to the wood stove. And then I always like to cover it with a cloth so that it prevents, especially if it's going to take a few days for it to fully dry, that will prevent dust and whatever else from getting on there, lint and so on, especially next to the wood stove. Anybody that has a wood stove knows it's everything around the wood stove gets coated in dust. You can dust, and 5 minutes later it's coated with dust again. So yeah, so I like to put just like a thin cotton cloth over anything that's dehydrating, thin enough that it can still get a lot of airflow, but just tight enough weave that it keeps all that dust out of there. Now the other thing I like to dry on my pans is whenever I make my homemade nut milk. I make all kinds of different homemade nut milks, and when I strain it out and I have all that pulp left over, none of that ever goes to waste. It gets used either immediately in pancakes or something while it's still moist, or I will dehydrate it up like I did here. And you can see here it's not like a flour, it's just sort of lumpy. And anyway, that's how it's usually, especially if it's got cashews in it or any real creamy type nut, it's going to clump together more than some of the other nuts, like when you're using almonds. Almonds is actually the easiest one to make into a flour, but that's okay, because then what I do, so I dry this on my pan same way on the rack with a cloth over it until it's fully dry, and then moving on to another unconventional use, I take these dried pulp pieces and put them in a coffee grinder that I have reserved specifically for everything but coffee. So I have 2 of these, one for coffee so I can just leave it as is and just keep using it to grind coffee. Then this gets used for grinding, for powdering up herbs, eggshells, orange peels, anything like that. I do use my blender quite a bit. Usually I use that for orange peels and for eggshells, but everything else gets powdered up in my coffee grinder. And I do find the coffee grinder works best when you're trying to turn your pulp, your dried nut pulp, into a flour. So I'm going to do that right now so you can see how well that works. Okay, so you can see right there, that's how it looks now. Okay, and then I just take it. It's still going to be probably a little bit grainy. It's not going to be as fine as your regular wheat flours and stuff, but it works pretty good. And then I just dump it in my jar here. And then just like before, I just shake it in to blend it well with the others, because I've been working through this nut flour actually pretty quickly. And then before I move on to the rest of this stuff, I do also use my nut pulp, a certain other blend, for making a vegan cheese. Just so you know, if you're making your nut milks, there's so many ways that you can use up that pulp so nothing goes to waste. You're actually getting more value out of your nuts when you do that. And it ends up being a lot cheaper and probably more healthy than buying the pre-made nut milks, nut flours, and even vegan cheeses. All right, the next thing I'm going to talk about is some interesting ways that you can use plates and pie pans. Now, the plate idea, I actually got a couple years ago from a subscriber when I was doing a video on making your waxed cloth, and I still do that. I still use those, but those aren't ideal for everything. And somebody says she likes to use plates as lids. Now, here's the thing I like about using plates as lids, is that if you've got a, let's say it's after Thanksgiving or some other big family meal, and you got a lot of stuff going in the fridge, like this is typically the bowl I would put my stuffing in from the turkey, then all I have to do is put a plate over it, and then I can even stack other things on top of it like I wouldn't be able to do if I used saran wrap over it, or if I used my wax fabric, because the plate is a lot stiffer, and if you have it laying this way instead of this way, it's going to be more, it's going to sit in there better. So this size, the salad plate, fits onto these medium-size Corelle bowls best. And then on the larger size Corelle bowl, the dinner plate fits really good. And another one that fits even better as a lid, if you know, I actually have a lot of things that have lids that I try to use, but that already have their own lids. But let's say you already got something mixed up in your bowl and you don't want to cover it with anything else. You don't want to, you know, waste any plastic wrap, or you just don't do plastic wrap because you're getting away from plastic. The Corelle pie pan fits even more perfect and more snugly on the Corelle bowl than anything else does. And that's not going to go anywhere. It's going to keep the food inside protected. And again, you can stack stuff on there if you're limited for space and, you know, you need to just keep stacking. So I can go like that. I can go like that. And then obviously I'm not going to store this in the fridge, but, you know, let's say it's something like that. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. That's my favorite new thing. I've just saved a whole bunch of room in my refrigerator, not having to use throwaway stuff, not having to use plastic. So I really love this idea, and I don't remember who it was that said the thing about the plates. I'm sure quite a few people already figured this out, but since then I've figured out more things, just like with the pie pan. The pie pan also works good inverted this way as a lid on certain other things, and I've done that before too. And then the other thing I like to use the glass pie pans for, besides making pie, is also using for holding any other kind of foods or preparing any other kind of foods. I like to make my homemade chocolate in this. I can make a chocolate bark, let's say a peppermint chocolate bark. It tastes a lot like a peppermint patty. Sometimes I'll use the little silicone molds for fun, but mostly I use the glass pie pan. So I'm getting away from the silicone, and I'm getting to use glass, and it's pretty easy. And then you just cut it up into bark. As you can see these pictures here, I've got pictures of the orange chocolate bark, and I think some peanut butter chocolate bark. And yeah, so it's it has many, many uses. A lot of times when I'm making something like my Asian chicken or anything like that, instead of using a plate, I oftentimes finding having a pie pan to stack my food in works a lot better. I find pie pans to be pretty invaluable for all kinds of things in the kitchen. Okay, another thing I like to use that's a little bit unconventional is canning lids for cutting things out. Now, this size here, while it would be good for biscuits, I actually do have a biscuit cutter, but if you don't have a biscuit cutter already, using one of these instead of using a glass or a mug is going to be a better choice, because you really need that airflow to be able to keep it from having that suction that kind of seals the edge of the biscuits and prevents them from fluffing up as well as they could. So that's why if you look at your biscuit cutters, if you have one, you'll see holes in the top, which is usually oftentimes also a donut cutter as well. Anyway, a canning lid like this, the regular mouth, is a perfect size for biscuits. But and then the wide mouth is perfect for cutting out hamburger buns. So I used to use, I can't remember what it was, I think a mug, a bigger mug instead of a glass. I needed something that was just a little bit wider. But of course that same problem, it kind of gets stuck in there. And I'm like, duh, why don't I just use a canning lid? And though yes, it can kind of leave a little bit of an indentation on top, usually this depth is just right for the hamburger bun, because then once it rises, it's still going to get puffy. As you can see in some pictures here of some homemade hamburger buns, which I do have a video on how you can make your own. Okay, now moving on to my newest thing that I just occurred to me out of the blue the other night. So we had a family get together here. It was one of our biggest ones yet that we've had here in our rec room and the way we've been fixing it up. And boy, did we just have a wonderful time. We had family that came from out of town. Most of the family that lives locally showed up. Just was a total blast. But anyway, I decided, because I just didn't feel like I got enough turkey at Thanksgiving, that I needed some more turkey, and plus I wanted to make some more broth to put away, which I also freeze in canning jars. Instead of just canning it up, I freeze it in canning jars instead. But and the turkey too. I wanted lots of leftovers, because there's lots of great things we like to do with leftover turkey. So anyway, and I made a gravy, and one of the other family members brought some mashed potatoes. And I have gravy boats. I have 2 of them, and they're fine and all, but they never quite hold enough gravy, especially when you're talking about a big family, and they can be rather messy. And so as I was digging out, I was digging down below to find I found my one gravy boat, and I was trying to dig for the other gravy boat. And before I got back there, you know, my gravy boats are stainless steel. I saw this stainless steel teapot that I don't use anymore, because I use the silver one. It's my favorite one, and that's the one I use for making my tea in every night. That one I got at a garage sale. And yes, I have a video on that. So I'm like, why not use this for gravy? That you can put a lot more in it. It'll be a lot less mess. It'll pour nice, and everybody loved it. I'm like, everybody, this is gravy. This isn't tea. This is the gravy. And from now on, this is my new gravy boat. Has a lid and everything, so it's going to keep things protected instead of having it all open. And then you just simply pour. It was so much easier to use than a gravy boat, and a lot less mess. And I love the idea that I can put so much more in this. And it was just kind of one of those aha moments that when I was digging around there and I saw that, I'm like, why not use a teapot? You might even want to consider, if you have a dedicated teapot and you don't want to mess it up with gravy, then just get another teapot like this. I guarantee you, way better than your standard gravy boat. All right, well, I know I'm forgetting a whole bunch of other unconventional uses I have for various things, but I do show, other than the gravy one, I do show many of the other things I'm showing you here in many of my other videos, if you would like to check that out. And now it's time for you to share down below some of the unconventional ways you use regular everyday kitchen items for, just like I did with this teapot or any of the other things that I shown you, so that we can all get some new fun ideas and just make life easier all the way around. Okay, well, I hope you're enjoying this series on kitchen tips and tricks, and don't forget to check out the rest of the videos in this series, and I still have at least 1 or 2 more videos to come out as part of this. All right. Thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.